The first thing Harry felt when he saw the news was disbelief. It wasn't the headlines themselves. They came slowly at first, filtered through the whispers of social media and tentative texts from aides and friends. No, it was the realization that the titles he had carried for years, symbols of honor, service, and identity, were no longer his. They were now legally his nephew's. Duke of Sussex, Earl of Dumbarton, Baron Kilkeel, each one transferred, not as a gift, but as a reallocation of legacy. Overnight, the markers that had defined his place in the royal hierarchy vanished, leaving him in an emotional limbo he could hardly navigate. Harry sat alone in the private quarters of his residence, the muted hum of a London night filtering through the curtains. He read the formal wording of the decree again and again, trying to understand if it was real, if this could possibly be happening. Legal documents are meant to be precise, emotionless, and final. And yet the emotion they carried for him was undeniable. Anger surged first, hot and sharp. How could his older brother make such a move without warning, without consultation, without even the smallest hint of dialogue? The sense of betrayal was immediate, cutting deeper because it came from someone who, despite everything, remained his brother. But then came the sadness. Not the public kind that can be rehearsed or managed for cameras, but the private, hollow kind that gnaws at the core. Titles, after all, were more than ceremony. They were history, responsibility, and recognition. They represented decades of service, personal sacrifices, and the intricate dance of expectation and duty. To have them reassigned so abruptly was to have a piece of one's identity quietly removed. In that moment, Harry's world narrowed to the stark contrast between what he had held and what he no longer did. And yet, amid the storm of emotion, Harry's mind began to turn. This was Harry, a man who had long navigated tension with the royal family, who had stepped back from public life in search of autonomy, and who had learned the hard way that control is often an illusion. He had advisors, lawyers, friends, and confidants, and his first instinct was to consult them. Could this decree be challenged? Was there precedent for contesting a transfer of titles? What options existed to regain not just his titles, but the sense of personal agency they symbolized? Stories began to filter through the palace grapevine. Some insiders suggested that Harry would consider making a public statement. Others warned that such a move could backfire, making him appear vindictive or undutiful. He weighed the consequences in real time, considering the delicate balance between private justice and public perception. Every possible reaction seemed fraught, each choice carrying both emotional and political implications. Could he respond without escalating the situation further? Could he reclaim dignity without igniting another scandal? Complicating matters was the question of Meghan. Although she was miles away, navigating her own media and professional obligations, Harry knew her reaction would matter immensely. The couple had weathered storms together, their partnership a shield against both familial and public pressures. Yet this decision tested even that bond. Would Meghan advocate for restraint, for patience, for private negotiation? Or would she push for a more assertive response, insisting that the world see the injustice in real time? The tension between personal loyalty and public strategy added another layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Then came introspection. Harry recalled moments from childhood and young adulthood when titles had seemed both empowering and burdensome. He remembered the first time he received a formal royal designation, the ceremonies, the expectations, the pressure to represent not just himself but the monarchy itself. He remembered late nights of reflection, private frustrations, and the constant negotiation between identity and duty. In losing these titles, he was not losing only honorifics. He was losing a tangible connection to his past, to the path he had once imagined for himself. Yet, as often happens in crises, clarity began to emerge. Harry started to see the decree not just as a loss, but as an inflection point. He could retreat further from royal life, as he had before, or he could recalibrate, redefine, and assert himself in ways that went beyond traditional titles. The situation demanded strategy, patience, and resilience. It was no longer just about what he had lost. It was about how he would respond, how he would protect his family, and how he would maintain relevance in a world where media scrutiny can be both relentless and unforgiving. The media response intensified quickly. Within hours, headlines appeared around the globe. Prince Harry stripped of titles. The royal decree at midnight. Prince George inherits uncle's titles. A shift in the line of succession. And countless variations, each emphasizing drama, betrayal, and historical significance. Social media amplified every rumor, every speculation, and every analysis. Harry saw his life dissected in real time, the emotional weight of the decree compounded by the glare of global attention. Friends and supporters reached out, offering advice, empathy, and warnings. The world was watching, and he had to navigate both the personal and the performative aspects of this unprecedented moment. Amid the media storm, Harry's personal reflections deepened. He recalled conversations with William, discussions about duty, family, and legacy, and wondered where those talks had left them. Had he misread intentions? Had he misunderstood his brother's priorities? The questions swirled with no easy answers. History, it seemed, was moving faster than the personal reconciliations he had hoped for. In that quiet, early morning space, Harry wrestled with the paradox of family loyalty and personal autonomy, a tension that had defined much of his adult life. Yet anger and sadness were not the only emotions. There was also a spark of determination, a realization that life would continue, and that identity is never solely tied to titles or external recognition. He considered the ways in which he could still impact causes he cared about, support his family, and navigate the public stage on his own terms. There was strategy to be formed, messages to be crafted, and a path forward to be negotiated. In the midst of loss, there was also opportunity. A chance to redefine not just his public image, but his personal sense of purpose. The personal implications of the decree were stark, but so were the broader ones. Harry understood that his response could influence not just his own trajectory, but the perception of the monarchy worldwide. Every public statement, every private action, and every interaction with family members had the potential to amplify tension or restore equilibrium. The balance was delicate. Misstep, and the public backlash could be severe. Patience, and the family dynamic might stabilize. But in that quiet early hour, one thing was certain. This was a defining moment, a crossroads that would test relationships, strategy, and resilience to the utmost degree. And so, as the first hints of dawn crept over the London skyline, Harry sat quietly, absorbing the gravity of what had happened. The titles were gone. The decree was official. The world was watching. But within him, the question lingered, heavy and unyielding. How would he respond? Could he reconcile the pain of loss with the demands of legacy, duty, and family? The answer would not be immediate, and the journey ahead promised both turbulence and revelation. But what came next would shift the narrative in ways no one could have anticipated, and the ripples of this moment would be felt far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. For most 7-year-olds, life revolves around playdates, school projects, and discovering the world one curious step at a time. But for Prince George, the night of the midnight decree marked a profound, almost surreal shift in reality. Overnight, the young prince inherited titles that had belonged to his uncle, Duke of Sussex, Earl of Dumbarton, and Baron Kilkeel. Titles that carried centuries of history, ceremonial weight, and public expectation now rested, in a legal and symbolic sense, on his small shoulders. The palace, of course, shielded him from the full drama of the situation, but even within the carefully curated environment of his immediate family, George was about to step into a new chapter of royal life that would shape both his present and his future. The news of George's elevation was not delivered in the sensationalized way the public might have imagined. There were no dramatic announcements, no royal fanfare. Instead, it arrived subtly, through conversations with his parents, Kate and William, who understood the gravity of the moment and the delicate balance required to communicate it to a child. For George, the titles were less about public image and more about identity. An invisible mantle of responsibility that would gradually settle upon him as he grew. Yet even at his age, children can sense shifts in attention and expectation, and the sudden weight of new roles cannot help but register, however subtly. William and Kate reportedly approached the situation with a mix of caution and nurturing. They understood that George needed to internalize the significance of the titles in ways appropriate to his age, while avoiding unnecessary anxiety or confusion. Discussions were framed in terms of responsibility and honor rather than power, ensuring that George saw the inheritance as a continuation of family tradition rather than a dramatic upheaval. For example, he was told that the titles symbolized trust, respect, and opportunity to serve, emphasizing character over ceremony. Yet beneath this careful framing, the reality remained. The young prince was now the legal holder of honors that carried centuries of historical weight, linking him not just to his parents, but to a lineage that had shaped the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth for generations. Observers of the monarchy have long noted that the upbringing of future heirs involves a delicate interplay of childhood innocence and preparation for duty. Historical examples, from child kings in Europe to young heirs in the British line of succession, demonstrate the subtle pressures and expectations placed on children in positions of power. In George's case, the sudden transfer of Harry's titles added another layer to this already complex developmental environment. It was a merging of tradition and modernity, a legal and ceremonial reality imposed on a child whose personal world remained, in many ways, delightfully ordinary. The psychological implications of such a transition are profound. While George may not fully grasp the political, social, and historical implications of his new titles, the subconscious awareness of increased attention and expectation is inevitable. Every family interaction, every formal appearance, and even casual play can be framed within the context of public observation. A child raised under such scrutiny learns quickly that private actions are often public, and personal choices can carry symbolic weight. For George, this was the beginning of a lifelong balancing act between identity, duty, and expectation, a challenge few children, anywhere in the world, will ever face. The public dimension of George's new role cannot be understated. Once the news leaked, the global media quickly shifted focus, dissecting the implications and speculating on what it meant for the future of the monarchy. Headlines proclaimed the young prince's elevation, social media erupted with analysis, and royal enthusiasts debated the historical significance. For George, the attention was not a matter of choice. Even in carefully controlled environments, the public gaze has a way of filtering through, influencing perceptions, and subtly shaping experiences. The palace, aware of this dynamic, took extraordinary care to manage exposure, guiding George through early public appearances with the intention of fostering confidence, poise, and a sense of purpose. Equally important was the parental role in this transition. Kate and William understood that titles alone do not create character, and they approached their guidance with thoughtfulness and patience. George's education, daily routines, and extracurricular activities were carefully structured to instill discipline, empathy, and resilience, qualities necessary to bear both the ceremonial and symbolic weight of his new position. In conversations with his parents, George was encouraged to ask questions, express feelings, and explore the meaning behind his titles in ways appropriate for a child. This nurturing approach aimed to prevent the sense of burden from overshadowing childhood, while gradually integrating him into the historical narrative he now embodied. Yet, despite these carefully orchestrated measures, the dynamics within the royal family inevitably added complexity. George's newfound prominence came at a time of heightened tension between William and Harry. While George himself could not fully comprehend the intricacies of sibling conflict or public perception, the atmosphere of subtle tension, whispered conversations, and strategic considerations likely registered in ways that were both conscious and unconscious. Children are remarkably perceptive. Even absent direct involvement, they sense shifts in tone, attention, and emotional energy. In this sense, George's initiation into a more prominent role was inseparable from the broader familial drama surrounding the Midnight Decree. The historical context of such transitions is both illuminating and sobering. Across European monarchies, child heirs have often been thrust into positions of authority or symbolic prominence before reaching maturity, requiring careful guidance, regents, or mentors. In Britain, while the system has traditionally allowed for a more measured transition of duties, George's experience represents a unique blend of legal formality, familial politics, and media scrutiny. The symbolic resonance of the titles, the weight of legacy, the continuity of lineage, and the unspoken responsibilities now rested on a child whose primary concerns would, under normal circumstances, be homework, friends, and play. This juxtaposition, the innocence of childhood against the gravity of inherited titles, creates a compelling narrative tension. How does a young prince internalize responsibility without being overwhelmed? How do his parents balance nurturing independence with guiding him toward historical and ceremonial competence? These questions define not only George's upbringing, but also the broader trajectory of the monarchy in an era where tradition and modernity collide constantly. Adding to this complexity were the indirect implications for Harry and Meghan. The transfer of titles, while legally straightforward, symbolically communicated a reassertion of authority, lineage, and succession from William to the next generation. For George, it was an inheritance; for Harry, a loss; and for Meghan, a poignant reminder of the delicate negotiation required to navigate royal life while maintaining personal agency. Each member of the family was now intertwined in a narrative of duty, identity, and public scrutiny, with George serving as the newest focal point. The palace reportedly took deliberate steps to frame the transition positively, emphasizing opportunity, growth, and service. George was encouraged to understand that the titles were not merely about power or prestige, but about the capacity to contribute meaningfully to the family, the monarchy, and public life. Stories of past child monarchs, ceremonial duties, and the symbolic value of tradition were shared selectively to foster comprehension and respect. In doing so, the palace sought to cultivate a sense of purpose rather than pressure, a delicate distinction crucial for a child thrust into historical significance. Yet, beneath the surface of ceremonial explanation, the broader implications loomed. The transfer of titles was a signal to the world. The line of succession, the preservation of legacy, and the recalibration of familial hierarchy were being actively managed. George, in his youth, may not yet understand the full magnitude, but the act itself reshaped perceptions of the monarchy, solidifying his position as a central figure in the next generation of royal continuity. His identity, public and private, was now entwined with history, expectation, and an invisible mantle of responsibility that would grow heavier with each passing year. As George adjusted to this new role, the world watched with curiosity and fascination. Social media buzzed with admiration, speculation, and commentary. Royal experts dissected the historical significance. Public reaction ranged from excitement to concern, reflecting the complex interplay between childhood, ceremonial duty, and global perception. For George, the challenge was not in understanding the controversy, but in integrating a new dimension of responsibility into the fabric of his daily life. And yet, even amid careful planning and parental guidance, the narrative tension persisted. George's innocence, contrasted with the weight of titles and the simmering family drama, created a dynamic that would define his early experiences in the royal spotlight. His new role was not merely ceremonial. It was symbolic, emotional, and historical all at once. The balance between childhood and duty would be delicate, and every public appearance, every decision, and every interaction would carry significance beyond his years. But what came next would place George even more directly in the center of a family and public drama that was far from over, and the consequences of this shift would unfold in ways no one could have predicted. From the outside, the Queen has always seemed a pillar of unshakable composure. Decades of tradition, ceremony, and public expectation have honed her ability to maintain calm amid crises that might topple lesser figures. Yet, even someone with her experience and poise was not immune to the emotional and political weight of the Midnight Decree. Prince William's decision to transfer Prince Harry's titles to Prince George was unprecedented, and while it aligned with the monarchy's long-term considerations, it also carried profound familial implications that could not be ignored. The Queen, at the very center of this delicate balance, had to navigate not only the legal and ceremonial ramifications, but also the emotional realities of a family in flux. Reports suggest that the Queen's reaction was measured, deliberate, and reflective. Early in the morning, Before the news had fully permeated the public sphere, she reportedly convened private discussions with her most trusted advisors and senior family members. Her first priority was understanding the scope and intent of William's actions. What prompted the decision? How would it affect the internal cohesion of the family? And crucially, how would it impact the monarchy's stability, both domestically and across the Commonwealth? The answers required a careful weighing of duty, tradition, and personal emotion, an intricate balancing act the Queen had mastered over decades, but one that never became any less challenging. At the stroke of midnight, a decree was signed that would send shockwaves through the corridors of Buckingham Palace, across the streets of London, and around the world. It was a move so unprecedented, so audacious, that even seasoned royal watchers struggled to comprehend its implications. Prince William, heir to the British throne, had quietly, and with unmistakable authority, transferred Prince Harry's titles to his own son, Prince George. The act was swift, almost surgical in its execution, yet its reverberations were anything but silent. Questions erupted immediately. Why now? What prompted such a dramatic transfer? And most importantly, how would Harry react to being stripped of the very honors that had once defined him as a senior royal? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. The timing alone raised eyebrows. Midnight is traditionally a quiet, reflective hour, a time for sleep, not political or familial upheaval. Yet, in the hushed chambers of the palace, officials scurried to ensure the decree was processed without delay. Every signature, every seal, every line of wording mattered. This was not a decision taken lightly. For years, Prince Harry had charted a distinct path from the royal spotlight, stepping back, seeking independence, navigating controversies with Meghan Markle. And yet, the weight of his heritage had never truly left him. Until now. What made this midnight move even more extraordinary was the secrecy surrounding it. Few had been informed in advance. Only a select circle of trusted advisors knew what was coming. The Queen, while undoubtedly aware, had left the execution to William, demonstrating not only the trust she placed in her son, but also the subtle reshaping of royal power dynamics. Rumors suggest that conversations took place in hushed tones, in rooms lit by candlelight and chandeliers, where voices lowered to whispers carried decisions that would forever alter the family's future. But what drove William to act with such immediacy? Was this a response to long-standing tensions with his younger brother, a calculated move to solidify the monarchy's line of succession, or a protective measure for Prince George, ensuring the next generation of royals would carry the family's responsibilities without distraction? The truth, as always, is layered. In the halls of royalty, actions often speak louder than words, and symbolism weighs as heavily as any official decree. By transferring Harry's titles to George, William was not merely rearranging honorifics. He was making a statement about continuity, legacy, and control. The titles were more than ceremonial. They were markers of identity, influence, and historical significance. To strip one royal of them and bestow them upon another is to rewrite a portion of history itself. Even the public, accustomed to scandals and surprises from the House of Windsor, was left stunned. Social media erupted almost immediately, with hashtags trending within minutes, and news outlets scrambled to report on what few details were available. The global audience hung on every rumored detail. What had Harry been told? Did Meghan know? How did Kate react? And what of the extended royal family? Each new report added layers of intrigue, conflicting narratives, and a mounting sense of drama that was almost Shakespearean in scope. The palace had never seen such a storm at such an hour, and few could predict where it would lead. Inside the royal household, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation and anxiety. Advisors, aides, and palace staff moved with measured urgency, balancing discretion with the practicalities of executing an unprecedented order. Meetings were convened, documents signed, and sensitive communications dispatched with the utmost care. Every action carried weight. Even minor missteps could ignite public controversy or inadvertently reveal internal discord. The stakes were immense, not merely for those directly involved, but for the perception of the monarchy itself. Stability, continuity, and public trust hung in the balance, and one misstep could destabilize centuries of tradition. As the news slowly leaked beyond palace walls, the human dimension of the story became apparent. Prince Harry, suddenly confronted with the loss of his titles, would have felt a cascade of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, perhaps even betrayal. For a man who had already struggled to carve out a distinct identity separate from royal expectations, this was another jarring reminder that the family legacy he carried was both a privilege and a burden. The titles were more than ceremonial. They were symbols of his place within a dynasty that had long defined him. To lose them, and to see them handed to his young nephew, must have cut deep, not just in terms of honor, but in the quiet, personal spaces where family ties intertwine with duty. Meanwhile, for Prince George, the sudden bestowal of these titles carried its own complexities. At an age when most children are still exploring the world through play and imagination, George was being thrust into the limelight of responsibility. Titles that had once belonged to his uncle now rested on his shoulders, signaling both a continuity of legacy and a foreshadowing of the heavy expectations to come. How would a child navigate such sudden prominence? How would his parents guide him through a world that prizes both tradition and spectacle in equal measure? The psychological and emotional stakes were enormous, yet masked by the public veneer of royal ceremony and duty. Adding to the intrigue were whispers of internal disagreements. Some reports hinted at debate among advisors over whether this move was prudent or whether it risked igniting a permanent rift between the brothers. Others suggested that William acted decisively, seeing the transfer as a necessary step to secure the monarchy's future. But within any large institution, especially one so steeped in tradition, decisions are rarely simple. Every action, every word, is weighed against precedent, public perception, and the potential for unintended consequences. This midnight decree was no exception. Its impact would be felt not just immediately, but for years to come, as historians, journalists, and royal commentators dissected the rationale and the fallout. The symbolism of midnight cannot be overstated. In literature and lore, midnight often signifies transition, mystery, and transformation. It is the hour when boundaries blur, secrets are revealed, and fates are altered. That William chose this moment to act was no accident. It underscored the urgency and gravity of the decision, and it framed the transfer of titles as not merely administrative, but almost mythic in its drama. Every detail, from the precise timing to the careful handling of official paperwork, conveyed a deliberate intent. This was a moment of reckoning, a turning point in the life of the modern British monarchy. And yet, questions lingered. What would Harry do next? Would he contest the decree, either publicly or behind closed doors? How would Meghan respond to news that upended the status quo yet again? Could reconciliation be possible, or had the midnight decree marked a line that could never be crossed? These uncertainties created a palpable tension, a sense of suspense that gripped not only the royal family, but the world watching from afar. Every statement, every leak, every carefully curated social media post became a potential clue, a piece of a puzzle that insiders and observers alike scrambled to assemble. What made this moment even more captivating was the collision of tradition and modernity. The monarchy, while ancient, operates in a world dominated by instantaneous news cycles, social media scrutiny, and public opinion that can shift overnight. A single midnight decree, carefully orchestrated behind palace walls, was now subjected to the relentless gaze of a global audience. Every nuance mattered. Every decision, from the exact wording of the decree to the timing of its announcement, was dissected, analyzed, and debated. It was not just a family matter. It was a spectacle, a drama of historical proportions played out in real time. As the world absorbed the initial reports, speculation mounted about what the next days, and even years, would hold. Would Prince George grow into his new titles gracefully, embodying the dignity and poise expected of a future king? Would Harry retreat further from royal life, seeking independence in a manner that once seemed impossible? And most intriguingly, what subtle power plays and behind-the-scenes maneuvers had set the stage for this dramatic turn of events? These questions created a tension that was impossible to ignore. The Midnight Decree was not simply news. It was the opening act of a saga that would unfold in unexpected ways, reshaping the narrative of the British royal family forever. By the time dawn broke over London, the palace had shifted in ways that were invisible to the public yet monumental in their implications. Advisors continued their work, staff moved with quiet precision, and the family navigated a delicate mix of private emotion and public expectation. Social media, television, and newspapers amplified the story, creating a feedback loop of speculation and commentary that would continue for weeks. And throughout it all, the central questions remained. Why did this happen, and what would come next? The answers were obscured in secrecy, strategy, and a web of historical precedent, leaving the world captivated and waiting for the next revelation. As we begin to unravel this extraordinary story, one truth becomes immediately clear. The Midnight Decree was more than a simple transfer of titles. It was a statement of power, a reshaping of legacy, and a profound emotional moment that touched every member of the royal family. And yet, even now, as details emerge and theories abound, the full impact of that night remains tantalizingly just out of reach. The next chapter, filled with reactions, revelations, and consequences, is where the story truly deepens. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. At exactly 12 minutes past midnight, a quiet tension gripped the inner chambers of Buckingham Palace. The grand halls, usually echoing with the distant sounds of ceremonial guards or late-night staff duties, were unusually silent. Outside, London slept under a cloak of fog and the occasional distant hum of a passing cab. Inside, however, history was quietly being rewritten. Prince William had taken a step that would ripple far beyond the palace walls. A decision so bold, so unprecedented, that even seasoned royal insiders whispered in disbelief. He had signed the decree transferring Prince Harry's titles to his own son, Prince George. But the story behind those signatures, those official seals, and that quiet midnight hour was far from simple. Why midnight? Why such secrecy? The answers lie in the intersection of urgency, strategy, and the fragile dynamics of a royal family under intense public scrutiny. According to palace insiders, the hour was chosen deliberately. It minimized the risk of leaks, reduced the chance of immediate media interference, and gave William the cover to act decisively before the world, or his younger brother, could react. It was calculated, surgical, and dramatic all at once. In the moments leading up to the signing, the atmosphere inside the palace was electric. Aides moved with a measured sense of urgency, carrying documents that, in any other context, would seem mundane but in this moment were explosive. Legal teams double-checked wording. Advisors whispered strategies. Every pen stroke carried immense weight. The decree was more than a formality. It was a statement, a message, and a pivot point in the modern monarchy. William knew that the transfer of Harry's titles was not just symbolic. It was deeply personal, historically significant, and politically charged. Harry's titles had been earned over decades of service, public engagement, and careful navigation of royal expectations. To reassign them to a child, even one as promising and beloved as Prince George, was a move that would shock observers and redefine family dynamics. Some advisors reportedly questioned the decision, warning of potential fallout. Public backlash, strained family relations, and media speculation that could escalate into a full-blown crisis. Yet William, weighing legacy and duty, reportedly felt the urgency outweighed the risks. The process itself was meticulous. Each title, Duke of Sussex, Earl of Dumbarton, Baron Kilkeel, required careful legal consideration, verification of precedents, and precise wording to ensure the transfer was effective immediately. The physical act of signing the documents was conducted with ceremonial gravity, yet behind closed doors, there was a quiet intensity rarely witnessed outside historic crises. Observers familiar with royal protocol noted that this level of midnight activity was almost unheard of. Past title transfers and royal decrees were traditionally announced during daytime hours, with the Queen or senior advisors present for ceremonial effect. This covert timing signaled not just urgency, but a strategic maneuver designed to control narrative and optics. But what of Harry during these moments? In the first hours of the morning, before the news fully emerged, it is believed he was unaware of the exact actions being taken. Insiders suggest that he would later describe the moment of discovery as surreal, learning that the titles he had held, cultivated, and been recognized for were now legally reassigned to his young nephew. The psychological impact of such a move is hard to overstate. For Harry, this was more than a loss of status. It was a public recalibration of his place within the family hierarchy, a message of authority from William, and a stark reminder of the enduring weight of royal duty. Prince George, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware of the political and emotional storm surrounding him. A child of 7, he was just beginning to understand the contours of royal responsibility. Overnight, he inherited not only titles but the expectations, scrutiny, and historical significance that accompany them. The palace reportedly took extraordinary care to shield him from the immediate intensity of media attention, allowing his parents to guide him through what must have been a bewildering transition. The juxtaposition between George's innocence and the gravity of the titles he now held created a dramatic tension that would only intensify as the story unfolded publicly. The Midnight Decree also triggered a cascade of internal palace actions. Security protocols were heightened. Communications were carefully controlled to prevent leaks. Senior aides were briefed on how to respond to potential media inquiries. Each decision, though procedural on the surface, carried symbolic weight, signaling a palace operating at the intersection of tradition and modern crisis management. Observers note that the combination of secrecy, timing, and meticulous planning underscores the high-stakes nature of William's decision, not just a familial one, but a strategic one designed to secure the monarchy's stability for generations to come. Historically, the transfer of royal titles has been rare and never under circumstances quite like this. Royal historians note that while titles have occasionally been reassigned due to abdication, death, or marriage, the deliberate removal from a living senior royal and reassignment to a child is virtually unprecedented. This context adds layers of complexity. It is a legal maneuver, a familial power play, and a public relations statement all at once. Each title carries centuries of tradition, public expectation, and historical symbolism, making the decision far more than a matter of paperwork. It was a deliberate act of legacy reshaping. The first reactions outside the palace walls began almost immediately. Even in the dead of night, news outlets caught wind of unusual activity, insiders whispered rumors to trusted journalists, and social media began to stir with speculation. By the early morning, the story had leaked in fragmented reports: a royal decree, titles reassigned, Prince George elevated overnight. The public response ranged from awe to disbelief, with some praising William's decisive action as a necessary step for the monarchy, while others questioned the morality, fairness, and emotional impact of stripping a senior royal of his honors. Within the royal family, emotions ran deep. Reports suggest that Charles, as heir apparent, was briefed on the decree and consulted on its implications, though the final decision rested with William. Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, is believed to have offered support in managing both the household logistics and the delicate emotional implications for Prince George. Meghan Markle's awareness and reaction remain a subject of intense speculation. Observers note that the human element of this story, the private heartbreaks, the subtle negotiations, and the hidden conversations, adds a layer of drama that rivals any public scandal or media headline. Despite the careful planning, tension lingered. Advisors worried about potential missteps. A leak, a misinterpreted statement, or an unexpected reaction from Harry could amplify the situation beyond control. Every detail of the midnight operation was scrutinized, from the exact timing of announcements to the phrasing of internal communications. In the corridors of Buckingham Palace, the quiet tension was punctuated by hushed conversations, cautious footsteps, and the knowledge that history was being made in real time. Yet, the decree was more than administrative. It was symbolic. It sent a message about succession, legacy, and the prioritization of family continuity. By transferring Harry's titles to Prince George, William effectively reinforced the line of succession, positioned his son prominently for the future, and conveyed authority over familial disputes. At the same time, it underscored the fragile balance between public expectation, private sentiment, and the weight of centuries of royal tradition. And still, questions persisted. Why this moment? Why these titles? How would the public respond in the days and weeks ahead? Most pressingly, what would Harry do once the reality of the decree hit him? The answers were obscured by secrecy, speculation, and the careful choreography of palace communications. But the reverberations of that midnight action would be felt far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace, influencing perceptions, narratives, and relationships in ways that were only beginning to unfold. As dawn broke over London, the palace entered a new reality. The titles had been reassigned, the decree was official, and history had been quietly rewritten in the quietest hours of the night. Yet the story was far from over. Behind closed doors, reactions simmered. Strategies were recalibrated. And one thing was certain. The next moves in this drama, from Harry, William, and the rest of the royal family, would be watched, dissected, and debated across the world. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Emotionally, the Queen faced a profound dilemma. She had seen her grandchildren grow up, each forging their own path within the shadow and light of royal expectation. Harry's journey had been especially complex, marked by both devotion to duty and a desire for independence. To witness a legal reassignment of his titles, an act that symbolically diminished his seniority in the family hierarchy, would have been a difficult moment, not only as the sovereign, but as a grandmother who had long cherished her grandchildren equally. Her perspective required the blending of personal affection with institutional responsibility, a tension central to the monarchy's endurance, but rarely discussed openly. In her private chambers, the Queen reportedly reviewed historical precedents. Monarchs before her had faced similar dilemmas: disputes over titles, succession challenges, and familial discord. In each instance, maintaining the appearance of unity and stability was as critical as enforcing legal authority. The Queen's contemplation likely included not only an assessment of legal propriety, but also an evaluation of symbolism. How would the public perceive this transfer? Would it reinforce confidence in the monarchy's adaptability and continuity, or would it be interpreted as a familial fracture broadcast on a global stage? The legal and ceremonial aspects of the decree were also significant. As sovereign, the Queen held ultimate authority over the conferment of titles, though in practice, she often deferred to senior royals like William for recommendations. By allowing the midnight transfer, she tacitly endorsed William's judgment, signaling a level of trust in his decision-making abilities while maintaining her own position at the apex of the institution. This delicate delegation of power reflects a broader dynamic within the royal family. The monarchy is simultaneously hierarchical, symbolic, and relational. The Queen's endorsement, or even her silence, conveyed volumes about where authority and influence resided. Yet, despite her institutional understanding, the Queen could not ignore the human dimension. Advisors close to her reportedly noted her concern for Harry's well-being. She understood the deep emotional resonance of losing titles, of feeling displaced within a family whose public scrutiny magnifies private pain. She considered the impact on Meghan, aware of the delicate position the couple occupied as they navigated their semi-independent roles outside the senior royal circle. And she reflected on Prince George, understanding that a child now carried not only legal titles, but the weight of expectation and the symbolic mantle of continuity. Balancing these emotional considerations with the imperatives of monarchy required a profound internal equilibrium. The Queen's response also reflected strategic foresight. By allowing William to act decisively, she preserved the continuity of succession and signaled stability in a time of potential uncertainty. Her decision-making likely accounted for the optics of the move, anticipating how the public and international observers would interpret both the action itself and the broader narrative it implied. In doing so, she exercised a subtle yet critical form of influence, guiding the monarchy's trajectory not through overt intervention, but through measured approval, timing, and the careful orchestration of private and public messaging. Historical insight adds another layer to understanding her perspective. Previous monarchs have faced crises where personal loyalty and institutional duty collided, from disputes between siblings to challenges in succession. The Queen's approach to these situations has consistently prioritized the longevity and resilience of the monarchy. In this instance, she had to weigh her personal feelings, love for Harry, affection for all her grandchildren, concern for family harmony, against the enduring responsibilities of her role. The decision to allow, or at least not obstruct, William's midnight decree reflects this balance, an acknowledgement that the institution's needs sometimes necessitate personal sacrifice, and that perception, stability, and continuity are paramount. Despite the Queen's experience, the situation was not without tension. Within the royal household, whispers of disagreement and speculation circulated, as aides and family members interpreted her actions and inactions. Would she intervene directly? Might she attempt to mediate between her sons to preserve familial cohesion? Or would she permit events to unfold, confident that the resolution, however fraught, would ultimately serve both family and institution? These questions added an undercurrent of suspense to what was otherwise a meticulously controlled environment. Even within her private reflections, the Queen may have contemplated the generational implications of this decree. Prince George, as the beneficiary of Harry's titles, symbolized the monarchy's future, while Harry's reaction represented the challenges of managing individual autonomy within the constraints of centuries-old tradition. The Queen had long understood that succession is not merely a legal procedure, but a social and cultural process, intertwining family dynamics with public expectation. This decree, while legally straightforward, therefore represented a microcosm of the ongoing negotiation between personal identity and institutional continuity that defines monarchy itself. At the same time, she had to consider international perception. As head of the Commonwealth, the Queen's decisions reverberate far beyond the UK. Commonwealth nations, media outlets, and royal watchers around the globe interpreted every gesture and decree as symbolic of stability, continuity, and governance. By tacitly approving William's decision, she reinforced a message of decisiveness and control, signaling that the monarchy could adapt to internal challenges while preserving the outward appearance of unity and authority. Yet, for all the calculation and foresight, the human element remained unavoidable. The Queen, deeply familiar with her family's dynamics, understood the emotional fallout that would accompany the decree. She anticipated tension, perhaps even estrangement, between brothers, and she recognized that reconciling familial love with institutional authority is a delicate, ongoing challenge. Her perspective was therefore both practical and profoundly human. She weighed legal authority, institutional stability, public perception, and family loyalty, fully aware that each factor carried consequences for the others. As the first daylight hours broke over London, the Queen's perspective set the tone for the unfolding events. She had silently affirmed the decree, managed the initial communications, and prepared the household for the inevitable public scrutiny. Behind her composed exterior, she held a complex web of emotions, judgments, and foresight. An intricate balance of grandmotherly care and sovereign responsibility. She knew that every ripple of the midnight decree would resonate through the family, the monarchy, and the world beyond, and that her response, or deliberate restraint, would shape both perception and consequence. And yet, even with her experience, she could not predict every outcome. How Harry would react, how Meghan would navigate the situation, how Prince George would internalize his new role, all remained uncertain. The Queen understood that history was being written in real time, with every interaction, statement, and reflection contributing to the narrative that the public and historians would one day dissect. Her perspective, measured and deliberate, was central to the unfolding drama, but it was only one piece of a much larger, increasingly complex puzzle. But what came next would reveal cracks, alliances, and tensions even she could not fully anticipate. And the ripple effects of the Midnight Decree were about to reach levels that would shock both the family and the world. The palace had long been a symbol of stability, tradition, and meticulous order, but on the night of the Midnight Decree, that equilibrium shattered in ways both visible and subtle. Buckingham Palace, usually a place of quiet routines and ceremonial predictability, suddenly became a hive of tension, speculation, and urgent activity. The transfer of Prince Harry's titles to Prince George was not just a legal maneuver. It was a seismic event, and its reverberations rippled through every corridor, office, and household department. Inside the palace, staff moved with measured urgency, balancing discretion with the practicalities of executing an unprecedented royal order. Advisors scurried to ensure that every document was accurate, every seal properly affixed, and every communication carefully controlled. Even the most experienced aides, accustomed to centuries of protocol, felt the weight of history pressing down. A minor mistake, a misworded statement, an accidental leak, a misrouted message, could ignite scandal on a scale unmatched in recent royal history. The stakes were higher than anyone had experienced in decades. Whispers spread quickly through the staff ranks. Some aides expressed awe at the boldness of the move, seeing it as a decisive step to secure the monarchy's continuity. Others were uneasy, sensing that the action could provoke personal resentment and long-term family tension. The balance between loyalty, discretion, and personal emotion was delicate. Staff members were caught between their duty to the institution and their empathy for individual members of the royal family, navigating a labyrinth of secrecy, responsibility, and moral judgment. Security protocols intensified immediately. Royal protection officers, already vigilant, found themselves recalibrating for a situation that had shifted without precedent. The decree's midnight execution meant that the palace had to manage both internal secrecy and potential external attention simultaneously. Even the smallest movement, an unexpected visitor, a curious journalist in the vicinity, or an unsecured document, could compromise the delicate operation. Every hallway, door, and office became a site of strategic consideration. Staff members had to anticipate not only logistical challenges, but also the psychological ramifications of a family grappling with betrayal, hierarchy, and public perception. Meanwhile, internal communications became a carefully choreographed dance. The palace relied on a complex network of encrypted messages, discreet phone calls, and face-to-face briefings to ensure that everyone was on the same page. Senior aides held back information to prevent unnecessary panic, while mid-level staff attempted to interpret fragmented instructions and rumors. Tension built as conflicting accounts of the midnight decree circulated. Some staff claimed to know the full story, others only grasped partial truths. This uncertainty, combined with the high stakes, created a palpable sense of anxiety throughout the household. The emotional stakes were equally high. The staff had worked closely with both Harry and William over the years, witnessing their achievements, struggles, and personalities firsthand. To see the transfer of titles unfold in secrecy, without warning, was jarring. Some aides reportedly felt a sense of moral conflict. Loyalty to the monarchy demanded discretion, yet empathy for Harry and Meghan created a tension that was impossible to ignore. Private conversations were charged with speculation and small gestures. Furtive glances, subtle sighs, whispered comments hinted at the human cost behind the legal formalities. At the same time, the operational aspects of the palace were strained. Scheduled duties continued alongside the crisis. Security patrols, household management, ceremonial preparations, and correspondence all had to be maintained. The juxtaposition of routine and upheaval created an almost surreal environment, where life went on outwardly as normal, while beneath the surface, every member of the household navigated unprecedented stress. Staff meetings became urgent strategy sessions. Memos, usually calm and procedural, were drafted with precision and caution, and even informal interactions carried an undercurrent of alertness and speculation. Amid this chaos, the media began to sense that something extraordinary had occurred. Rumors of a midnight decree leaked, and journalists, social media users, and international observers began piecing together fragmented accounts. Even minor details, a door left slightly ajar, a hesitant press officer, an unusual security movement, were scrutinized and interpreted as evidence of significant royal upheaval. The palace household, tasked with maintaining secrecy while executing complex operations, found itself on high alert, acutely aware that any slip could amplify speculation and public scrutiny. The interpersonal dynamics among the staff added another layer of complexity. Long-standing loyalties and personal relationships were tested. Some aides had deep connections to Harry, having served him closely and developed affection and respect over years. Others were aligned more closely with William, invested in his vision for the monarchy, and committed to maintaining institutional stability. These alignments, often subtle and unspoken, influenced decisions, conversations, and even the ways in which duties were executed. The Midnight Decree revealed not just institutional dynamics, but the human dimensions of loyalty, trust, and the navigation of conflicting interests. Meanwhile, the ripple effects reached other parts of the royal household. Departments responsible for public communications had to anticipate questions, prepare statements, and manage potential leaks. Legal advisors reviewed the decree for compliance, historical accuracy, and ceremonial propriety. Ceremonial officers began contemplating the implications for upcoming events, appearances, and protocols. Every department, from kitchens to offices, felt the weight of a decision that was, on the surface, administrative but, in reality, transformative. Even within the family quarters, tension permeated. Conversations were guarded, eyes lingered on uncertain expressions, and private interactions carried unspoken questions. William and Kate, aware of the household's anxiety, reportedly held private briefings to ensure coordination and discretion. They emphasized loyalty, adherence to protocol, and the importance of maintaining a unified front while managing the emotional complexity of a family undergoing dramatic shifts. Yet, for all the planning and control, the chaos was palpable. Leaks were inevitable, rumors impossible to suppress entirely, and emotional undercurrents impossible to ignore. Staff members navigated a web of secrecy, duty, and empathy, aware that each decision, each statement, and each gesture carried potential consequences for both the monarchy and individual family members. The palace, often seen as a model of order and tradition, was now a site of subtle turmoil. A reflection of both the human and institutional stakes entwined in the Midnight Decree. Even as operations continued and the household stabilized on the surface, the emotional and psychological impact lingered. The staff had witnessed history being quietly rewritten, and they knew that the consequences would unfold over weeks, months, and years. Alliances would shift, tensions would simmer, and the ripple effects of that one midnight decision would be felt in every corner of the palace. What had started as a legal formality had become a catalyst for drama, speculation, and reflection, a moment where duty, family, and human emotion collided in ways that would shape both the present and the future. And yet, even as the household adapted to its new reality, the story was far from over. The next wave of challenges, decisions, and emotional reckonings was approaching fast, and the Midnight Decree had set the stage for conflicts, revelations, and consequences that no one within the palace, or beyond it, could fully anticipate. But what came next would test loyalty, reveal secrets, and ignite tensions that the palace had never experienced in living memory, and the world was watching every move. The moment news of the Midnight Decree leaked, the media storm was instantaneous. Within minutes, headlines exploded across international news outlets, social media platforms, and 24-hour news channels. Prince Harry stripped of titles, historic decree at midnight, blared one online headline. Prince George inherits uncle's legacy, a royal power shift, declared another. The world had barely woken up when the news began spreading like wildfire, and the palace found itself thrust into the center of an unprecedented global spectacle. The frenzy was fueled by a combination of shock, speculation, and intrigue. Journalists and royal commentators raced to analyze every detail. Why now? What does this mean for the line of succession? How will Harry respond? Media outlets dissected the decree's language, comparing it to past title transfers and highlighting its historic implications. The fact that it occurred at midnight added drama and mystery, turning a legal action into a story of suspense, secrecy, and perceived familial betrayal. Social media amplified the intensity exponentially. Within minutes, hashtags began trending worldwide. Hashtag Harry stripped, hashtag Prince George rises, hashtag Midnight Decree. Platforms like Twitter and Instagram became flooded with analysis, memes, emotional reactions, and speculation. Fans and critics alike dissected the situation, debating the fairness, morality, and motivations behind William's decision. Every comment, post, and reaction became a microcosm of global interest, highlighting the unique way in which the royal family exists not only as a historical institution, but as a constant subject of real-time scrutiny. In addition to public reaction, expert analysis dominated the media landscape. Royal historians, former palace aides, and political commentators appeared on news programs and talk shows, providing context and interpretation. Some framed William's decision as a decisive step to maintain order and continuity, emphasizing the importance of legacy and the symbolic transfer of titles to secure the monarchy's future. Others criticized the move as emotionally insensitive, potentially exacerbating familial rifts and exposing the royal family to unnecessary scrutiny. The contrast between historical justification and emotional critique created a dynamic tension that kept audiences engaged, dissecting the story from every possible angle. International media coverage intensified the drama. From the United States to Australia, newspapers and broadcasters highlighted the story as both a personal family matter and a reflection of broader cultural and institutional dynamics. Headlines emphasized intrigue, familial tension, and the unprecedented nature of the decision. Royal watchers in Canada, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth nations examined the implications for local perceptions of the monarchy, while international audiences debated the human and political dimensions. The global reaction underscored the unique position of the British royal family, a domestic institution whose decisions reverberate across continents, shaping perceptions, public discourse, and cultural narratives. Celebrity commentators and influencers quickly joined the conversation, bringing their own perspectives and adding layers of spectacle to the unfolding story. From YouTube channels to TikTok threads, content creators dissected every nuance, historical context, psychological implications, family dynamics, and even the timing of the decree.